All right. I want to welcome everybody to our second virtual forum here at the Access Services Interest Group. I apologize for starting late. My computer wasn't behaving, so I had to call in. But I'd like to introduce Kurt Munson at Northwestern University, who will be talking to us about vision for next generation resource delivery. I know it's a very timely topic with all of the changes that are occurring both on the software front and just in the way that our users are making use of our resources in new and interesting ways. And that's enough of an introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Kurt and let him get started. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Can you hear me, Brad?
Not a problem.
Okay, excellent. So, thank you. I'm Kurt Munson at Northwestern University, Assistant Head of Access Services, and this presentation, Put the Patron First, a vision for next generation resource delivery, has grown out of some work that we were doing in the Big Ten Academic Alliance. That's the academic side of all of our football teams. And we were going through looking at a lot of different things in terms of what the discovery to delivery process is like for patrons and how we could improve that. So that's really the meat of the presentation, but I have three different sections that I want to go through. I first want to start with a very quick 3 to 5 minute introduction of how we got to the point that we're at. Then I want to dive into what led us to talk about those things in the Big Ten and what we came up with as potential ideas to improve this process, not only for patrons, but also for staff too. And then I want to end by taking a look at more ideas that grew out of the work that we were doing, which was really highly technical, and we started talking more about policies, and I want to just briefly touch on some ideas of policy changes that we could make that will make this a much better process for everybody. So in the immortal words of David Byrne, well, how did I get here? Let's get into the Wayback Machine with Peabody and Sherman and go back to 1967. We have the first ATM machine introduced, PBS starts, the Bee Gees record their first album, but I would argue the less said about that, the better. And importantly for resource sharing and what we're talking about today, OCLC is founded. Fast forward to 1979. Margaret Thatcher is elected, Morning Edition starts, because there's this bizarre combination of public broadcasting in the U.S. and major things happening in interlibrary loan lining up the same year. Dukes of Hazzard starts, but again, less said about that, the better off we are. And importantly for this, OCLC introduces the interlibrary loan subsystem because they now have a sufficient number of holdings in their system that they can start thinking about, identifying who potentially could lend those. But I think it's important that to emphasize that notion of having holdings in there, not loanability. Fast forward to 1997, the Teletubbies debut. Colorado State's library suffered that horrible massive flood, and this is relevant for us because that's where we see the rapid system being developed in response to that. Open URL is starting to be used, and finally, Iliad was introduced. Fast forward again to 2016. In March, at the Iliad International Conference, OCLC announces it is, quote, moving Iliad to the cloud, end quote. And with this, in many ways, we had 49 years of incremental development gone. And we fluctuated back and forth with, it's the end of the world as we know it now, to use the REM song, and I feel fine or I don't feel fine, and so on and so forth. So that really was a change, as we'd been building stuff through all of those periods based upon what had gone before. Also in 2016 and 2017, in summer of 2016, the CIC finally said, all right, enough, fine. We're just going to turn ourselves into the Big Ten Academic Alliance because we are so tired of saying the CIC. It's the academic side of the Big Ten. Also, through the course of the summer of 2016 and culminating in November of 2016, we were working on the first of the reports that I'm going to be talking about, which we titled A Vision for Next Generation Resource Delivery. This vision document grew out of a charge that we were given, which I will show you shortly, and because all good documents that you write in a consortia, you have to write even more documents. So based upon that vision for next generation resource delivery, which was a very specific phrase that we came up with, they then said, we love this, the deans did, go write us another report and share that, Kurt. So in August of this year, we released our next generation resource delivery management system and UX functional requirements document, which built upon the vision and then said, okay, how can we actually make that a reality? What pieces do we need to put together? Now, this is the charge that started all of that work roughly 3 months after OCLC had made its announcement. You don't want to read it. You don't need to read it. I purposely made it gray, so it's really difficult to read. And the reason that you want to do that is, just ignore this, is because that's exactly what we did. And it was with great trepidation that I made the suggestion to the first group that I was working on, the one that came up with the vision. That was myself from Northwestern, Bruce Barton from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Melissa Egme-Brown from the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, Ken Varnum from the University of Michigan, and then Zoe Chow from the University of Penn State University. Almost confused my consortia, sorry. Anyway, I suggested, we really can't do what they're asking us to do. And I said the reason for that is because that fundamental foundational software, Iliad, that this system is built on and predicated upon is being changed over to something new and different. This was 3 months after they made the announcement. Tapasa wasn't even named. Nobody had even seen a wireframe. Also, the recommendation spoke to an already superseded infrastructure. There was no point in trying to build on that stuff that just wasn't going to be there anymore. And also, I really felt that further incremental changes or tinkering with stuff just simply didn't make sense. In many ways, this was a break with that 49 years of history of what had been going on. So instead, what we decided to do was to step back and focus on how we could do things better in a really, really super broad sense. Whereas when I was going through that history, we were seeing the development of library systems. There's no point in there where a patron was ever mentioned. There's no point where we ever asked, well, what do you need this system to do for you? He said, vaguely sounding like JFK. So we decided to take and flip this and start with the notion of, let's give the patron a dashboard where they can do everything, and then we're going to backfill in from that the individual library system's functionality rather than basing this on what the systems can do and kind of pushing that into the patrons' faces. So I hope what we ended up doing was describing an easy-to-use patron-focused system. We asked ourselves, well, but this is all brand new. What would it look like, and what library system pieces do we already have that we could put together? And what other things are we going to need to create or have our vendors create for us to make this system work? Because the thing is, if we are honest with ourselves, the current discovery to delivery system process is really a terribly, horribly complicated jumble. And I recognize this is as a really super terribly busy slide, but I did that on purpose because this is what we present our users with. It's sort of like when Lady Bird Johnson was like, oh my God, there are all these horrible billboards up and down the interstates. We must get rid of them and simplify it. So, just here at Northwestern, we've got local discovery, we have this random consortial borrowing thing that kind of fits in the middle, and then we have, here's the entire world, but we're going to give you two different interfaces for that. You find something, then we're going to give you all of these different options because that's the way Primo and Alma, our systems here, work, all of these different options, If it's something we have locally electronically, we're going to tell you every single possible place you could get the blasted thing as opposed to delivering you directly to that article. If we don't have it, then here's your separate system that you have to go into, but then you're going to manage your stuff that we have locally here. I mean, it's just really, frankly, honestly, it's kind of a mess. This is kind of a mess part one everywhere. We have a bunch of often legacy dated systems and workflows that were designed before systems could do what they can do now. We have these selective discovery systems that are often pointing to a single back end. And then if a patron needs to move between systems, the handoffs are jarring because, as I describe it, what we've done is we have all these library systems that frequently do just one thing. And if we think of them as icebergs, we expose this teeny tiny little tip of that system to the patron, and then we make them jump between those iceberg tips. It's really not terribly friendly. Or we have systems that try to do all things for all people, and of course then proceed to not work and fail. Duplicating functionality, not particularly well, and/or data. Why do I have a table of patrons in my ILL management system when I have a far better one that's populated daily from university information in my ILS? And this just leads to confused patrons and added work for staff. So it's kind of a mess part two, Northwestern. Local holds are processed differently than ILL request. If anybody's ever seen our stacks, they're radial. So they're extremely difficult to navigate. So we just pull stuff out of the stacks for our patrons. But that's processed one way differently. Yes, we are able to circulate everything that we have in ALMA, but that's only because I've been able to kludge how Iliad and ALMA talk using NSIP, and I swear I'm on the 8th version of that add-on. IDS Logic does a tremendous amount of automation in Iliad because either OCLC's ILL system doesn't go that last mile, like giving me local availability, or ALMA requires something special like its internal MMS ID. Patrons are managing things in multiple places. They're confused. So yeah, it works, but it's held together with duct tape. Or alternately, as I say, Pet Shop Boys lyrics do not make good design principles. Because honestly, if you have to run through that many questions and that many options, it's just really not where it should be in 2017. So that's kind of the point that we got to working on the reports, and we had lots of conversations about usability and confused patrons and so on and so forth. And we were trying to come up with a way of describing this that was a short, simple phrase, basic concept. And it's what I call the if, then, else idea of things. It's, if you can do if this is criteria is met, then go off and do that. If not, then do this other thing and repeat through that. So we came up with the notion of smart fulfillment. Not just so I could put a picture of Maxwell Smart on a slide, but because we really thought that the previous system was kind of dumb because it couldn't talk. There was no communication back and forth between things. If we go back to that slide of that giant jumble of different systems. So behind this interface, we envisioned a smart integration of fulfillment systems, obviously to improve the services that we provide our patrons, but simultaneously helping us manage our costs, because inefficiencies in jumping between systems is not particularly effective, and it's super ineffective when the patron goes, I don't know which one to choose out of these three. I'm going to do all of them because I have no guidance whatsoever, and then we have 3 requests, 3 items that we get. So smart fulfillment meant intelligent rules-based request routing to the appropriate fulfillment system, i.e. that notion of telling the computer, if you can do this, then do it. If you cannot do that, do this other thing. If you cannot do that second thing, do this third thing, so on and so forth, routing things to the appropriate preferred system. We thought about, format, because if we can't order an ebook, we shouldn't be able to place a request for it. How long is it going to take to show up? What's it going to cost us? And what does the patron require? So that's really where we started with this, was we kind of defined, it's okay, it's going to be a smart fulfillment system. Okay, great. What do we need to put together to, in fact, create that smart fulfillment system? What pieces, what tools, what things could we do differently that is going to make that process work better? The first thing that we need to do is modern technologies, start using them. OpenURL is 20 years old, and it's a one-way communication. It can populate a form. That's it. HTTPS, let's send stuff across through web headers. We do that with a ton of other stuff. We have APIs that allow us to place requests into fulfillment systems like the Relay D2D system. We can place holds in ALMA using APIs. We have ISO 18626, which is the new version of ISO ILL coming out. That is a dynamic system that's able to send a request to a system, and if the system has a question or a problem with it, it can send a response back, and they can talk and have a conversation instead of previous systems that weren't able to do that. That's going to give us the ability to automate processes rather than having the patrons or the staff rekeying stuff over and over again and then clicking buttons. Second thing we need is intelligent routing and updating requests between systems that are talking and listening to each other. That whole notion of what the new ISO ILL is supposed to be able to do, so that we can say, if it fits these criteria, turn it into a purchase-on-demand request. If it is available locally in the stacks and loanable, do this. If we don't want to do either of those, then do something else with it. And can we please, 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 as I get on my soapbox, start using the local item barcode as the identifier for that item as we track it through whatever system. It's attached to the item, for goodness sakes. Let's stop putting pieces of paper with other tracking numbers or this number or so on and so forth in things. Let's use the barcode. Let's give frequent status updates, such as shipping. It's ridiculous in 1997 that the only way that we know something is on its way from the owning library and that they filled the request is that we see a due date area filled in. Let's give the patrons a single dashboard where they can manage everything regardless of where it comes from, because guess what? They don't care where we sourced it from. They just want to know how long they have it for so that they can accomplish what it is that they're trying to do. And in that whole notion of making it simple for them and all they want is the resource so that they can use it for whatever their purpose is, let's get a nice neutral get it request button that starts this whole process where the person's like, I want this thing, and then we go off and say, okay, fine, we will do that for you. So these are all of the things that we were thinking about, and we started having conversations about, well, what exactly is this going? I mean, we can't really call this an ILL management system because it's more than that. In many ways, it's more distributed. It's not the library services platform because it's doing other things beyond what that does. So we needed to come up with a new name for what this product was going to be. And hey, we're librarians, so we had to come up with something that we could turn into an acronym. And we describe this as being a next-generation resource delivery management system. That takes it, because in many ways, it's the management of the delivery of that resource that the patron wanted that we needed to be able, that's the whole point of this. How we decide to deliver that resource is going to be different, and your mileage may vary, but ultimately the notion is to have a system that's going to do that sort of delivery, or RDMS, which is also why my presentation is titled what it is. So this is specifically from what we wrote. I mean, it is a direct quote from the UX Management System and UX Functional Requirements report, which was the second report that we did in August. That group was myself, again, Bruce from Wisconsin, Melissa from Minnesota, and then we were joined by Angela Davis from Penn State, engineering librarian, so that we could get the perspective of the people that work in the sciences. So the first thing that we said is, okay, this management system is going to, number one, integrate with the primary discovery layer for the institution. It's going to give delivery options to patrons there, and then we're going to ask them to, make selections on what they want to do to initiate that delivery workflow. Once that happens, it goes into the delivery workflows that we will have set up to optimize routing of requests for fulfillment partners based on what the patron needs and what the preferences are. So local hold, do that. Can't do that, send it off into the consortial borrowing system, not available through that. Try your next option, boom, 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 going down, working through all of those. Integrating work with and working alongside the library services platform to get the patron information, to pass the request, to manage the actual loan for the circulation, so on and so forth. So what we're doing here in this system is leveraging other systems that are better at handling things than a traditional ILL management system would be. It needs to integrate tightly with the fulfillment network management systems. That's Bruce language. For us, it would be Relay, Rapid, OCLC, WorldShare, so that we can find partners that would be able to fill that request and then manage the transmission of the request to the lender. Again, this whole idea of delivery tracking, billing, if we build a local patrons, as some places do, or the other libraries if needed to do, the notion of tracking, the simple idea of using the UPS and FedEx web services so that we can do the same thing that Amazon does, and I can have a button in my discovery layer for that particular thing that I can click and go, where's my stuff? Also, we need to generate and manage communications with the patrons about request statuses and availability. We need that sort of messaging, not just there, but also, frankly, for the staff. Because, again, it's like you send the request off into the blue, and then it comes back at some point, or maybe it doesn't, and during that entire period, none of us know what's going on as it's processing through potential lenders and so on and so forth. There is no earthly reason that we need to do that at this day in age. It's like we're going back to 1979 and sending it off into the OCLC system, and because it's not like you had tracking for the postal service at that point, but it's not the world we live in, let's move into the 20th century. So a couple of extremely dense slides text-wise, and I apologize for that, but it really is the meat of what we were working on. We did a lot of communication about, well, this is how interlibrary loan works, and this is this and that, so on and so forth. And Bruce, as an IT person, got very confused by what we were talking about, Melissa and myself, because we're like, oh, the web services for Relay do blah, 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 blah for you borrow, and so on and so forth. And poor Angelo was even more confused because she works with patrons and knows what they need information-wise and what their information gathering styles and skills and processes are. And she's like, what is this lender string of which you speak? So Bruce created this very nice visualization of what the previous slides are talking about. And I like it because we have the public over here, and the only thing that they're having to see is the discovery layer. We have back and forth arrows here between the library services platform and the discovery, which would make sense because that's the way that discovery layers work to get, availability and so on and so forth. And then we have the library services platform talking to that resource delivery management system here. Library staff are working on this. And then it's from the resource delivery management system that we go off into what Bruce named Fulfillment Network Manager Systems, which will manage the various partners from which an item might be acquired. What we have done here is we have shielded the patron entirely from having to know the different systems that they might use. We give them a single discovery layer as opposed to providing them with multiple ones based upon where we might source an item from. So those 4 that I showed in that initial slide, we've been able to reduce down to 1. Now, that's not to say that this discovery tool couldn't be, local catalog not available, expand out to searching WorldCat, whatever, but they don't have to go to different front ends for different fulfillment mechanisms. So this is how Bruce envisioned this as an IT person that would be putting stuff together and writing APIs that would be able to do X, Y, and Z, and so on and so forth. This is how I pictured it myself. And again, I recognize this is an extremely busy slide. The presentation will be available for people to review, so on and so forth. I'm happy to send the PowerPoint out if that's wanted to. But what I want people to concentrate on here is not the words, but rather the number of arrows that there are. And more importantly, the number of arrows that there are that are going both directions. The only point at which this goes in only one direction is when we start with the inputs and we've authenticated the patron and they're starting to place their request. Otherwise, everything that's going on here is systems talking to back and forth between each other. So this is very much what we were working on, and this is what I did for myself to be able to lay this out in a graphic so that, I could figure out, okay, what's missing in this and so on and so forth, because I tend to be a very visual person and a visual learner. So that was sort of our, technology, how can we put this together, so on and so forth, part of it. But I kept arguing that improved technology is only part of the answer. We also need to have effective policies. Or, as I frequently said in the meetings, the delivery part is the comparatively easy part. Once somebody has identified something, then we just need systems that are capable of identifying a potential loanable or scannable copy of that item, and then we can ship it. It's not like shipping things is a radical concept. Amazon does it all the time. But on the other hand, I said, the delivery, easy. Discovery, on the other hand, is incredibly complex. I've worked with humanities people. I was in a medical library for quite a while. So I've worked with the sciences, social sciences, so on and so forth. All of these people and all of these different populations, their processes are incredibly complicated and all very different and so on and so forth, as is just overall user behavior. And a lot of what we talked about as we were working on the management system and UX functional requirements report, the second of them was, how can we guide patron behavior? How can we let them know this is your best option? You know, click, you know, we're going to pull our local copy for you. You'll have it in 24 hours. The local copy is not available. We can get it for you from another library that's part of our consortium, but that's going to take 5 days for it to show up, so on and so forth. You know, it's that notion of guiding the patron behavior rather than the current system where they're just confused because we give them all the options with precious little information about exactly what that means and what they might expect. So this is a line that Bruce wrote. The library should be able to order the presentation of options with the aims of nudging the patron to choose the preferred option. In other words, don't give them a recall button and an interlibrary loan one. And the second line is a total Bruce line, but I love it because it's that notion of engaging patrons in a community of stewardship of library resources. You know, patrons are not inherently evil. The patron is not broken, to quote Karen Schneider. But if we give them confusing options with no context, they're not going to know what to do. And if they have ideas of, you know, well, this is how it works at my institution, but now I got this thing with a plastic band on it from another library and all the rules for that are different, sort of thing. So, you know, the more we can guide them and the more we can give them, you know, ideas of, you know, what's expected and here's the context to work within, the better off we are. That gets us to the point of policy. And unfortunately, our policies are frequently rooted in history and informed by assumptions, and particularly anecdotes of bad things that are remembered. You know, the horrible incident where the patron, you know, was mugged on the L, and I had to fill out, you know, paperwork for the insurance company so that the patron could reimburse the library for the ILL book that he had had. You know, I remember that. I don't remember the roughly 31,000 borrowing loans that we got last year here that we sent back with there being no problem. And as Dwayne was talking in the last period, you know, loan periods, why is it 21 days? Nobody really has a basis for that. So as part of this notion of guiding the patrons and having a unified, you know, stewardship of library resources, you know, I think we really need to look at what our data tells us and make sure that how we're interpreting that is in fact actually what the truth is. I also think we need to ask ourselves, what do we actually want to have happen? I don't think, you know, we've done that. We're like, well, this is what our policy is. Why do you have that policy in place? What do you want to achieve by it? And how can we use that policy, therefore, to guide the patrons? So I've got a couple of slides on some various assumptions that we have, and then what I've been able to do here to show how we can most effectively guide what patrons are doing. And this also has grown into being part of what we've been talking about in the Big Ten too. So I fear there shall be a third report that we're going to have to write. First thing is the assumption overdue notices encourage returns. This teeny tiny little box over here that says when I'm signed into Iliad and I look for, you know, things that were due earlier in the year, only 24 out of those 2,500-ish, you know, things, or this dinky tiny little number are 30 days or more overdue. Obviously that's because your lending operation is sending my borrowing operation an overdue notice via email, and somehow magically this causes my patron to return things, even though my patron never actually sees that email. And frankly, most of the time, my borrowing staff just delete it like I'm pretty sure everybody else does. It's not an effective tool. Yeah, the number might indicate that, but you know, you can say anything you want with license statistics. The reality is And this goes back to one of the major points of the report was the ability to standardize things and give patrons that single dashboard to look at. We use NSIP here to go from our Iliad system into our ALMA system. The ALMA system displays in the discovery layer to the patrons. They have a single account where they can see everything that they have checked out, whether that's a local Northwestern thing or it's interlibrary loan. And we're mean and evil. When something goes to being 30 days overdue, we block their interlibrary loan account, and in ALMA, they are automatically charged a $125 replacement fee and a $10 processing fee for every single item for each of them. Now, given that a patron is blocked at $100, you have one overdue item, your library privileges are blocked. It is an exceptionally good tool to remind them to renew things, and it's an even better tool to get them to return stuff, because the thing is, what we want is for them to return stuff. So that very consistent situation gives them a clear environment to work within. They know what the rules and expectations are, and they also know that if they break those, they're going to have consequences for that. You know, so it's a tiny, dinky little number. You know, 765 out of nearly 171 circulations even went into lost status. Very, very, very small. Now, this is partially helped by the fact that our consortial borrowing system has a guaranteed 12-week loan period, the UBorrow system, and a guaranteed 4-week loan renewal. So that's 16 weeks, so that's a semester, but we're on the quarter system, so it doesn't particularly matter. And then all of the faculty and all of the graduate students have term loans for local materials. So we're also reducing the total number of things that we might ever need to be dealing with that. But when it goes to the point of being overdue, there are consequences for that 30 days later. Again, because we have these disparate systems that don't talk to each other and patrons don't know what's going on, and then doing a bill is a nightmare because you're either doing an Iliad and then you have to go to other systems, so on and so forth, we tend to think that patrons lose an awful lot of ILL items. And then there's this notion that they're not easy to replace. And I had one of my staff members go through and I'm like, okay, find every single bill for every single thing that a patron lost last year. And in 2016, out of 29,000 and change, 29 items were lost by the patrons. That's it. Were they late returning many of them? Yes, but they were late returning them because they still needed them, which is probably the biggest argument for very long loan periods and renewals. So teeny tiny number of things lost by the patrons, number one. And then number two, I said, okay, go find me, figure out which of those we can replace via Amazon. And it turns out of 29, only 3 of them could not be replaced via Amazon. So tiny, 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 dinky little numbers with this. I would like to argue that this indicates that, I just saw a question from Peggy. Yes, we did see extending the loan period reduce the number of lost items, and it also extended the number of, greatly reduced the number of renewals that we needed to do. Someplace where I used to work, we had a 2-week loan period because that's what that type of library did. 89% of our stuff was renewed. Now, if there's not a more glaringly clear, we're not serving the patrons well, we're not working with what their needs are situation, that's it. But this also, shows that it's not, it goes back to that idea of we remember the bad stuff, not the good stuff. So And you can say, okay, well, that's all really nice, well and good, Kurt, but that's Northwestern, and Northwestern is, unique. You're on the quarter system. You start ridiculously late in September, blah, 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 blah. That data doesn't transfer to my library. Actually, I would argue that if you loan something to my library, my patrons are your patrons. And if I can get them to return stuff, then you're getting it back, so my data is your data too. In other words, borrowing and lending are just two sides of the same coin. And with some of the work that Zach Lane has been doing in Borrow Direct, they're seeing extremely consistent patron behavior across all of the different libraries there. So, in conclusion, in a nutshell, improving the patron's experience requires libraries to move beyond that traditional platform-centric approach to one that relies on invisible information exchange between systems using protocols, not keystrokes or people. Give them a single dashboard and then have all the systems automated and running in the background. But even if we do that, when they get the item, if they don't understand the rules and policies surrounding the use of that item, it's not really going to do any good, and we're still going to be chasing after them. So I would say if we're going to make the process easier, we also need to make the policies that surround it easier to understand. Make sure that they're actually doing what we want them to do. Little, small overdue fines on a daily basis do not encourage patrons to bring things back. They just annoy them. So if we give them an easy situation to work in, they'll understand how they can really, do their library use more effectively. So all of the different reports are here. And at this point, I'm going to open this up for questions. And Brad, you had said that you would be willing to do questions, so now that I seem to have lost, yeah. So if you have questions, please.
So Kurt, there was a question that came in at a much earlier slide, which I'll go ahead and go to, and then you can catch up on the ones as you've asked for them. Somebody was asking about this single back end that you were speaking of, and asking, isn't it an overly complicated back end as well?
I mean, I suppose you could say that, but again, I mean, every library's situation is different, and what we were working on was something that would be able to handle things within our consortia, which consists of many of the flagship universities within the Midwest that are supporting state consortia. Then they have the Big Ten consortia, local catalogs, wide variety of things, so on and so forth. I'm not saying that every place is going to need this, and frankly, I would be very happy if I could make it simpler.
Okay, thanks. And then somebody asked if you could go back to the slide with the reports web address.
Sure.
So I'm going to take advantage of the fact I have a microphone and actually ask a question in relation to the policy piece with circulation data, and you even mentioned Dwayne's presentation from a few weeks ago. And I'm kind of curious as to how one encourages sort of this alignment between the resource sharing community and then people who are focusing more on the circulation user services side, which are maybe in the same department but are often different people. How do you encourage that communication to begin to align those policies in a way that is treating these materials sort of the same regardless of where they came from?
I think that really needs to start with going and I see that there was a question, asking whether this is possible, and I think, in fact, it is possible. And in many ways, I think this goes back to that, slide with the Dukes of Hazzard, 1979, when OCLC introduced the ILL subsystem, and then every single library came up with their policies for what their loan periods were going to be, and so on and so forth. And that was a very, very, very individualistic, very library-centric situation for that. And I think we've perpetuated that to this point, but we're seeing in very large, high-volume consortia an alignment of a guaranteed loan period that's shared across them and guaranteed renewals. I know that Borrow Direct is doing something like that. We've got that here in the Big Ten, and we're starting to have a nationwide conversation about a nationwide minimum loan period. So I think it is possible to do that, and also just talk to your CERC people. I mean, I'm lucky in that we were able to, I work very closely with our head of circulation. Hi, Basha, I know you're watching this. It's just trying to align that. And again, if we go back to the notion of we're doing this for the purposes of the patrons, and we want to make it a consistent, improved experience for them, does it not behoove us to try to bring these, local and consortial loan periods in line? When we, for example, when we went to the 12-week loan period for the UBarrow consortial borrowing system in the Big Ten, we changed our loan period here for undergrads to 12 weeks so that it mirrored the two.
Okay, thank you, Kurt.
No worries.
It seems like I unintentionally end up creating the theme of let your stuff go, folks, just from ILL and from just traditional circulation. So one of the questions was, can you say more about why the RDMS should be separate from the LSP? The former e-resources librarian, I'm cautious about replicating failures of the ACRL electronic resource management as a separate system from the LSP.
I think that an ERM versus what we're talking about with the resource delivery system is kind of apples and oranges. We are very mindful of that. We're also very mindful of doing the equivalent within Access Services of creating an interlibrary loan management system. The idea behind this is to have a much lighter weight system that in many ways is a bunch of, it's a flow chart. It's not recreating stuff, and we don't want it populated with information that doesn't need to live there. It's a flow chart for the requests, but whereas other systems right now have, full patron tables in them, like Iliad, we don't want to duplicate that information. If we can go to the LMS for it, we absolutely want to be able to do that. So it's really its job is to route the request, but the LMS, the Library Services Platform, is not going to pull in the information from UPS that we want to be able to then present in the discovery layer. It's not going to do the other things that we need a system like this to be able to do. But yeah, we definitely do not want to reinvent the wheel and recreate another giant big system.
Okay. Somebody else posed a question that's almost like rhetorical, but I'm curious of your answer to this. Is anybody working on developing that platform neutral get it button?
I know that there have been efforts at Minnesota to work on this. I'm not aware of a whole lot of other effort, but one of the other things that was a concern for us as we work through this was, well, how much is going? Okay, UNT, whoever you are, I want that thing right now. But this goes exactly to my point. We're not very good at sharing this sort of development. We have a tendency to go off, and every single institution reinvents the wheel as opposed to saying, yeah, that's actually perfectly fine and it would work here, sort of thing. It's almost as though we've taken the notion of we have to give our local discovery tool a cute name, to the point of like not being able to share anything with anybody else. So I mean, it's just getting information out there, letting people know we have in fact actually done this. So.
Okay. And somebody just asked another question. As far after seeing the North Texas example, are any participants in the project involved in the development of Folio, which I think is a really good secondary question of what you just said as far as sharing, if anything, programming efforts of linking things together, or even the Hydra development as well.
At ALA in Chicago this summer, we for the team that wrote the second report, the functional requirements in UX, we had a meeting with the Folio people. They've seen all of the reports. They know that we're doing this. So yes, that information has been shared, at least by us.
So there aren't any other questions. I have one more. I'm going to call it a nutshell question, because with all the Oxfording, you don't get to spend more than a minute on your answer, which is, do you have any recommendations for us, the participants, as far as thinking about this vision to get us to thinking differently on how we deal with the TPASA implementation that's happening simultaneously?
Much of what we were doing through this, because these reports are very much influenced by the fact that TPASA is coming. We point blank in the executive summary of the first one say we can't do what you told us to do because TPASA. So my suggestion for people, and what I would like to very much see a conversation based around, is what do we need the TPASA system to do? Not what is. Not what did ILIA do, or not what did other systems do, but what do we want there to be in TPASA. There is a community center that OCLC has set up for that. Please contribute, please +1 what people have already said. If you disagree with them in the comments. Communicate to OCLC what the system needs to be for your users. Talk to your circulation people, talk to your reference staff, do all of this, because I think we should also take this transition from ILIA to TPASA as an opportunity really to rethink how we've been doing things and to try to come up with a system that's easier for all of us. For example, if we had a nationwide minimum loan period and we ordered something from you and you're not a partner that we normally work with, but you've got a super collection in that area, or you've got that thing that somebody wants, the patron comes to me and says, how long am I going to be able to keep this for, since it's coming from, blah, 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 university? I'd be able to say, you've got that for a guaranteed 60 days. Let's simplify these things, because that's going to make it easier for us, and it's also going to make it easier for the patrons.
All right. I really appreciate it, Kurt. I do not see any other questions. So before we completely can it, I'm just going to Thank you for taking the time to do this and for all the work you and the others in the Big Ten Academic Alliance have done to get us thinking more creatively and openly about what we should be seeking in not only resource sharing software, but also how we should think about the overall user experience for using these types of resources. In addition, I just wanted to take a moment to do a quick sort of plug for some other activities that the interest group will be doing in the next few months. Most pressing, really in the next 2 weeks, I had sent out a call for people who wanted to participate with the framework for Access Services librarianship. If that's something you're even remotely interested in, I did send email information in the last announcement about this talk. But I'm taking calls until tomorrow, but if a few people straggle in afterwards, the more the merrier. But we will be getting started on that hopefully in December. Also next week at the Access Services Conference, if you're there, there will be a tour of the Emory Access Services unit with transportation provided. That will be on Friday. And I've also made arrangements for the same type of tour at the Auraria Library at Denver during midwinter next February. The last thing is that this is the last of the two virtual forums that we have for the fall semester, for lack of a better term. But if you're interested in speaking, or if there's a topic that you would like to hear about, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and let me know. I'm certainly looking for people and topics for the spring as well, hopefully in March and April. Other than that, thank you all for participating.
Thank you for having me.